All right, we have the Old Testament reading. Just so you see where we're coming from before you start, you wonder, what's he doing here? This is this time of year when I do some outside preaching. Most of the time I just sit at home and do what my wife tells me. But I was at Leesburg one week, and then a couple of weeks ago I was at Harlinsburg. When these things happen, I try and preach from things that are really arresting and interesting to me. And I just want you to know that when I preached in Harlinsburg, and I preached a sermon called, it's from a song, Classy Girls Don't Kiss in Bars Like This. I don't know if you've ever heard it. It's by the Luminaires. It's a good takeoff point because it says something about what our society has degenerated to in the family way. Finally, today I'm caught by a couple of different thoughts. The first has to do with Labor Day. We're in the Labor Day mode. But the thing is, nobody pays any attention to it anymore. It's the last holiday of summer. Yet I think we ought to be paying attention to Labor Day and to what's going on in the workplace, because Labor Day anymore is caught up in adversarial relationships. We can talk about it all we want, but management and labor wants their way, and what the other side thinks doesn't count. Now, if that's true in labor, there's no place where it's more visible than in politics. We look at the impasse of this last couple of years. Ever since the Democrats lost the majority in Congress, and since then things have been pretty much at a standstill, and they have the right to do that. But I'm really concerned about the hate that I see. The fact that so many people think that their idea is all that counts. And that if someone doesn't think the same way they think, they ought to just be basically forgotten. Now, I really believe that most of this antagonism started with the outburst about George W. Bush and the war. It's the coming of age of what happened during the Vietnam War. But the point of it is that, that's a kind of a space here where we're not taking any quarter. You're either my way or you are my enemy. And nothing hit me quite as much as 2 weeks ago when in Congress, Nancy Pelosi was holding forth with the idea that if the Republicans had been playing square, they could pass this immigration bill. But the Republicans weren't standing right on amnesty, and consequently, nothing was happening, and she was angry. And there's a guy who must be over in eastern Pennsylvania by the name of Marino. He's a representative. And he got her so mad because he stood up and he said, the Democrats had the majority the whole way down. They were President, Senate, and Congress. And they didn't pass it in that first honeymoon after Obama was elected, when the Affordable Care Act got passed. So essentially he was saying, Nancy, you're being a hypocrite. You didn't do it when you had the chance. She got so mad, and she's an attractive lady, and she got stomping over to where he was giving this speech, And she's really in his face, and she can't do anything else. Finally, she sputters and says to Marina, Redhead's the only person in here that knows this. Redfoot, I'm sorry. She says to him, You're insignificant! I don't think I have heard anything in the last 10 years that gives a picture of the gulf between what we feel about ourselves and others as much as that. I think it was there in Ferguson for 2 full weeks. That if it's not my way, then it is to be despised. Now just cover that and listen to these 3 passages. First from Ecclesiastes, from the words of Solomon, verses 7 through 12. If you see in a province the poor oppressed, starts with 7. When dreams increase, empty words grow many, but do you fear God? If you see in a province the poor oppressed and justice and right violently taken away, do not be amazed at the matter, for the high official is watched by a higher, and there is yet a higher ones over them. But in all, a king is an advantage to a land that has cultivated fields. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with gain. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. And what gain has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much. But the surfeit of the wit of the rich will not let them sleep. Then turning over to the Gospels, in the 22nd book of Matthew, just 2 or 3 verses. Teacher, which is the good commandment in the law? And Jesus said to them, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments depend all the law and the prophets. And turning over finally to 1 Peter. I guess if I look at the bullet, it'll help with it. I'm using cars. 1 Peter 2, 9 through 12. Now this is really tough. A stone. You are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, that you may declare the wonderful deeds of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were no people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. All right, now that's where I was going with the Candy Morris kids. The idea that when we are Christ, when we know we are Christ, when we know that our tomorrow is secure, then nothing that happens is going to hurt us, so we can take time for somebody else. So we can take time to do the right thing. So we can take time to be caring. Were you in on watching Ferguson? I watched hours of it. And the resentment, just how much those black people in St. Louis County felt they had been crapped upon. Not just in this kid, that was nothing. They felt this had been the way all of the black history in the United States. And you take a redneck like me, and I see something like that, and you know, I start getting a little red in the neck. I mean, my people, some came early, but they were in Pennsylvania. Then others came to Ohio in 1858 or something like, just before the Civil War. Now, I don't know there's a bunch of draft dodgers in my background at all, but I do know this, that the Civil War was fought and the blacks were freed. And most of the people who fought to free them never had any stain of slavery on their hands. But how could L. Sharpton have the guts to stand and say that the McCrumbs, or the Roses, or the Browns, or the Books, or the Pennies owe them anything? Oh, but we were taken out of Africa. Just think if they had stayed in Africa. They look at it as the great debacle, but just think the vistas that were open because they were, believe it or not, lucky enough to get out of River City. It never came, and that thought never occurred to me until years ago when I was reading a Tom Clancy movie, Tom Clancy novel. And these two operatives are in Africa, and one's black. And he said, you know, he said, I really, every time I'm here, I think about how fortunate my family was. Now, when you look at it with that standpoint, then you begin to catch a sight that there has been abuse. I'm not going to deny that for a minute. You begin to really think about the grievance industry. You did this to my ancestors. You kept me back from that, da-da-da-da-da-da. And the thrust of it is that in Jesus Christ, it's our job to encourage. It's our job to show. It's our job to share. Not because we have to, but because we want to. The whole thing isn't just here. The whole thing is the number of people in our country who believe that they're entitled to everything, and the rest of us don't deserve squat. Years ago, there was a book written by the president of one of the Iron Curtain spin-offs called The New Class. I never can remember his name right, it's pronounced right, it was Milton Deitches. And his thought was that instead of the people ruling in communism, the time had come and continued to be more that way, when there was a class of people that were ruling. They were running the businesses, they were working the factories, da-da-da-da-da-da, and their interest was only in themselves, not the people who were working in the factories, the farms, or whatever. It was just for the new class. And the people in the new class would feel more akin to the same class in another country than they would to the working people in their own country. Have you thought about Wall Street lately? Have you thought about the fact that Nancy Pelosi is the richest person in the Congress? Have you thought about the fact that again and again and again, boards meet and they give the presidents or the chief operating officers of these big corporations unbelievable wealth while they stick it to the guys and gals that are working in the factory? It's all around us. It's not just in one particular phase. It's all around us. It's Us and them. And us'ns, we deserve all the praise. And the others are just a bunch of clones. Just a bunch of, use the old communist term, proletariats, or serfs, or peasants. And they don't really count. They live in poverty, and they grow, and they die. But the fact of life is that in the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon says, sweet is the sleep of a laborer. And it's built into us. We got to work. We got to do something. We just can't sit and veg. Because if we sit and veg, we die. So we go out and we work. We do our things. And we come back and we're tired and we're sweaty. And we take a shower. We eat supper. We interact with our family, and we go to bed, and there's no problem sleeping, is there? Oh. If I'm so laid back, and I've been napping all afternoon, and I've been eating all day, and I lay down in my bed, and I don't sleep well, because why? Because I don't need to sleep, because I haven't done anything. Now, my wife could get into a speech right here, but you just have to understand this, that this is the truth. When we work, when we labor, great things are happening, and it is the way that God created us. The idea is to understand that what makes it all different is this idea from the Lord, from Jesus, that we should love God and